Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today is a special episode because it is technically almost a season wrap on peeking into the Green Bone Saga. Because as you guys all know, we have announced it. Next week, we're getting Fonda Lee on to really close out the series with an author interview. But today's episode is just a season wrap up. It's a time for Laura and I to just discuss the books as a whole, the trilogy in and of itself, and final thoughts. So this is a special episode for us. We do not talk about what we're reading, watching it, enjoying. We only enjoyed the Green Bone Saga.
Peeking into it. We're not talking about anything else. The only thing we enjoy is this.
We're not even peeking into it. We're just in it.
We're in it. There's no more peeking.
We're in the Green Bone Saga, guys. I'm going to die.
I feel the tears coming.
But Laura, I think this is one of my favorite series of all time, honestly.
I love this series so much.
I just feel like these book series are very beloved. I feel like sometimes you and I walked out of some of our past series, we've walked out of them feeling frustrated or feeling like something mixed, or some books were hits and some were misses. There were moments where we were oh, I'm not sure if that was my favorite book, or I love the series as a whole, so this book will hold up for me, but it maybe wasn't the greatest. But this book just feels so complete and mature and perfect in so many ways. I can't get over how well thought out this series is and how well plotted it is. And just how much I didn't mind that this entire series spans over the course of so many years and yet feels so perfect.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with all that. I think you're dead on when you say that this is a series that feels complete. And I, again, agree when we compare to previous series that we've covered that there maybe was a little bit of disjointedness between books, and certain books we like more, certain less, this or that. And a lot of our listeners or people that we interact with online would say similar things. This one, I've yet to really come across people who haven't just kind of gobbled this up and appreciated the progression of the series and its characters. And honestly, Fonda must have taken so much time to put this series together. I can't even imagine the plotting that went into this. Oh my gosh. I forget what I had for lunch. How can she remember what happened to the members of the Call family all this time and what's going to happen to them in the future to make these things tie up so neatly? That it's astounding, the thought that was put into this series.
I can't get over. And this is a book series where you and I have seen our season 1 was Wheel of Time, of course. And you and I have seen people who make their entire content just Wheel of Time. And I think you could do years on the Green Bone Saga. I think you could do
this would be a series that would be really good for chapter by chapter. A lot of podcasts do that type of format. Yeah. We're not as much about that, but I would do it for this. I would do it for this book series because there's so much going on in every single chapter that you could easily make whole episodes talking just on one chapter, 10 pages.
Just chapters on the interludes, chapters and chapters of just interlude research and how timelines match up and what's going on where, and how different interludes are brought up in different storylines. And it's a masterpiece. This is such a complete, it's a complete thought. And I'm amazed that Fonda Lee has them because I don't have complete thoughts, but it was just, it's very interesting.
Another thing I really like about the series was how the characters are portrayed in such a way that nobody is inherently good or evil, and how even the villains have redeeming qualities or make good points. And I think that's something that's unique to this series, where in a lot of fantasy, there are characters who are the good guys and they just have all the good qualities, and even if they do something bad, everyone still loves them. It's that doesn't really happen, or the big bads are just so evil that it just becomes ridiculous. And this series plays its characters in such a way that you can sympathize and empathize with them and their motivations if they're a hero, but you can still recognize like they're not perfect people. They're making mistakes. They're doing things that we don't agree with. They're also doing things we do agree with, and we're rooting for them at times. The same goes for the villains, where they are doing a lot of bad things too, but there's never really a point in the series where you can just be like, this person is totally evil and we should just condemn them completely. She does such a great job of writing a gray area.
Well, and this is something I really believe in life. You and I actually were just talking about it off mic, that like no one is a monolith. Like I think sometimes with books, it's very easy to fall into like, well, the character would never do that, because it's usually in such a short span of time of like a couple months. And like how much growth can you do in a month? Like my favorite is I've seen a ton of TikToks about how Bella and Edward and Twilight have known each other for less than 2 years through the course of the trilogy, or the 4 books.
Oh my. Like
that's
short.
Someone has done the math, and it's less than 2 years that they've been together.
Unmathed. I don't want to know.
Like unmathed. How dare you?
Never say that again.
Never mention that.
Please never mention that to me.
Please, we have a Discord. Please get on our Discord and go to the episode chat and just be like, did you know that Bella and Edward were only together for less than 2 years?
I can't handle some of these Twilight facts that people bring up. Like, I just can't.
Again, my favorite TikToks are still people saying like, and their baby rutabaga. And of course their baby Rumpelstiltskin. But like there's something about these books that Fonda Lee gives us a very large history of this family, but she also gives us perfect little snapshots. So like so much time passes that you see them in a moment in time. And that moment in time is not like, it's not the same person you saw, a book ago, or even sometimes like 5 chapters ago. It's them in their purest form in this moment. And that is always changing. And I do love that for the characters, because you're right, none of these characters are perfect and none of them are fully formed, but they are fully human. And I think that that's a very unique and very difficult thing to do. And so I just like, it's so good to see that type of writing, because I don't think it gets utilized enough, especially in fantasy works, honestly. Like I think in fantasy it has like, well, this is this character, this is this character, and this is like a very unique fantasy. It's very unique.
I think a main difference between this series and other fantasy series, if we're just going to compare to other fantasy, we're looking at a plot-driven versus character-driven story, and the Green Bone Saga is character-driven by far. And I get it that obviously like characters push the plot forward. However, in this series, it's just really centered in on the characters and what they're going to be doing, which makes it really unique.
I also think that there's something very unique in letting people fail in realistic ways. Like we both know Fonda Lee is like economics. She like knows things about the world and like math and science. And I do think a lot of writers are usually creative types. And there's something fundamental about like the real world and the way it works with like numbers and economy and all this stuff. It gets set up to fail in very stupid ways if you think about it. And Fonda Lee understands that. And so like the way the calls often fail is because like they're not working in international trade in the correct ways, and they're not being seen well in the public media. And there's such like unique things of like, yeah, we deal with this in the real world. And like even Mata in this series is constantly failing because she doesn't want to go into foreign territories and work on other people's terms. She wants to work on her terms. And it's like, well, if you are going to stay stuck in the mud and not like change or update your views, you are going to fail. Like
the world's going to keep moving on without you.
Exactly. And so that was like, Hilo was the least successful when he was the most stuck in his ways. And the second he started making concessions, he started seeing the world in a different way, and he was able to expand his views and become a beloved person because he got the time and he got to change. Like it's a very specific thing of like, you must change or else you will fail, and very weird and silly ways. But even like it boggles my mind how in the second book I definitely clocked where I'm like, Mana is failing. Like she is no longer the big bad that everyone thought she was, because she's just gripping onto one type of power and it's not working anymore.
And I also think this also kind of ties into a theme that I see throughout this series where Fonda Lee has focused in on the importance of community and how we don't go on our journeys alone. We need to have support from other people. We don't necessarily always have to agree with other people, but we literally can't do things by ourselves. Right. And like you said, Hilo was most successful when he was not just focusing on one path. And he was even more successful when he was bringing in people around him that were really capable and smart and utilizing them to their fullest. Yeah. Even if he didn't always agree with them, they built him up and helped him to be better. So I think really the importance of community is a big theme in this as well.
Yeah. I will say, because you and I have just been like love bugging over this series, I think the one time that I ever felt a little bit of like frustration, I mean, not the only time because Barrow exists in this novel, but
I don't think that this is like a series where it's like there's no frustrations ever.
No. But like I definitely want to talk about them a little bit because I do think I was a little frustrated in the last book that like Hilo never seemed we didn't get to see the Hilo and Wen healing portion. Like that was one of the things that did get glossed over and I thought would have been great to see, because I don't think we got to see Hilo vulnerable as much. We just got to see Hilo realize he made a mistake and then he got better afterwards. But like there is something to be said about like we are seeing snapshots in the moment in time. No one is a monolith, but we also didn't get to see that progress. And I think that would have been the most satisfying out of all these characters, because I guess by the end of the book I did love Hilo so much and hate him all at the same time. But I think sometimes seeing the fact that like people sometimes backslide, like I don't think Hilo's journey was probably a straight line, because knowing him, he is very stubborn and he's very set in his ways and he's very I see the world in only one way. And so it would have been nice to see a little bit more of that struggle, because I will say like the one thing is we don't get to see Hilo struggle very much. Like we get to see a couple chapters of it, but the people who struggle the most are like Wen and Shay.
We see Hilo's struggles through those characters.
Yes, and we are often not seeing Hilo himself, and I do think that that's sometimes frustrating when like at the end of the novel he is the main loss, he is the main, you know, like it's interesting to do it that way, but I was frustrated that sometimes we didn't get to see the comeuppance with him, or like Andon still idolized Hilo by the end of it. And it's like, Andon, come on.
You know, it's interesting that you say that though, because it's a really unique way to play with POV. And I kind of like it being left open a little more, where we don't know what happened there. And we kind of have to fill in a little more of the blanks ourselves, because I think that's you don't always know what happens from the outside, and even the characters closest to Hilo may not have completely understood him during that period of his life. So I think I kind of like it, but I will say that I do agree about the Andon thing, where like he never was in a place where he didn't think Hilo was awesome. And I do think that even though I did not struggle with Hilo as a character as much as you did, I do think there needs to be more on some of these other characters, because I feel like Shay was really one of the only ones to call Hilo out for things. I think some of the other characters needed to be a little more like, come down from the cloud. We need to recognize that Hilo does some really crappy things, even though he does a lot of great things. And it felt like some of the characters didn't recognize that. But I don't know. I think I kind of like the POV where we don't necessarily see Hilo's struggle, because it makes him more interesting if we don't know the full story.
Yeah. I guess I could see
in
that.
real life. I would want to know if this was like a real person. I would want to know, and I need to have some answers for why he behaved a certain way. Right. But when this is a story that I'm reading, I'm a little more okay with kind of leaving things open for me to interpret myself or kind of hear secondhand from the other characters how things went.
That's very fair. I think I disagree just because I like he was such an interesting character because like
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at some reviews and they were talking about like the modern day parallels to nationalism, racism, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, all those different things. And I do
Yeah.
think that there's a certain amount of intersectionality that kind of gets left on the table with Hilo that never gets
Mm-hmm.
addressed. That he kind of gets to be a little bit more nationalistic because he doesn't travel the world as much and he is the
Sure.
head honcho in his nation. So like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he just never seems to have his comeuppance because he is a man in those areas. So they
Mm-hmm.
may be racist, but like he never goes into those areas. He always sends someone else, but he sends like
Mm-hmm.
the Shays of the world who people take seriously because of her education, but then she also gets tortured and she also gets kidnapped and she has like the threat of being a woman sometimes, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it does touch on that. And I just don't think that there's enough discussed on the intersectionality because it's often the women being put in those places. And
Mm-hmm.
so the sexism science sometimes shines through, and it would be interesting to see if it was less of the sexism. Not to say I want more racism. That is a bad way of saying it, but like I think it
Mm-hmm.
would be interesting to not have Shay and Wen be the ones who got those types of things happening to them and to see
Mm-hmm.
Hilo push back on from outsiders who do not see him as powerful because usually what happened was the outsiders always tried to get to him through women and that is a frustrating thing to read sometimes.
I will just maybe counter with I kind of feel like in real world situations, the sexism runs rampant and men can use the privilege of being men to protect themselves, where women might be in situations like Shay and Wen were more often. And so I guess to me, it plays a little more realistic because Hilo is able to kind of use that privilege in terms of like being a man and being powerful, and he can just be like, no, I don't want to go, I'm gonna send my sister, I'm gonna send my wife, that's woman's stuff to do. And i I just kind of, it almost plays out as realistic to me, but I do get what you're saying.
I don't know because like you also have it's almost like I think it frustrated me sometimes because like we had moments where like with oh my gosh, I already forgot his name, but the mercenary,
Jim
Jim,
Sunto.
Jim Sunto, uh, where like Hilo points it out where he's like, hey, you're gonna take the fall for this because of racism. Like
Yeah.
no one will be here helping you.
Mm-hmm.
And like Hilo, it's always commented around him how like, oh, well, people from Espenia or people from Espenia think people from KCON are brutal or, you know, or like lesser than or this or that. But he never actually has to like interact with it. He's always
Mm-hmm.
interacting with people in KCON. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's frustrating because, like, although I agree that like sexism does ram rampant, I will say that like racism is a huge part. It's just like Hilo decided not to deal with it. And that's kind of the problem I see where it's like we didn't
Okay.
have to see it because Hilo chose not to see it deal with it. And like it would be interesting to see how Hilo would have dealt with it, but he just seemed to go hands off. And that's it was like something I felt was left on the table because I do think that like there is a certain amount of racism when it comes to like how people view like it's like when Andon went over to Espenia, they dealt with it where like Andon was treated as lesser than, Andon couldn't talk to the cops, Andon couldn't do that, you know, like they did
Mm-hmm.
deal with it through other lenses, but we never got to see someone in power have to dictate it. He just got to work within money and the confines of his own home. And it's frustrating when the only time he had to deal with it was through how women were being treated. You know, it was just,
Okay. I guess we were thinking of different things, talking about
yeah,
different things. I got on the wrong page here because I was focusing more in on the sexism of
yeah.
it all and male privilege. So that's my bad for misunderstanding.
No, you're fine. but like, yeah, so I did see like where we could have had a little bit more of Hilo like I guess I just maybe my entire message is like, well, Hilo could have learned more lessons. Like, but you know, he didn't have to. He was born in a place of privilege, and my
and
biggest
that's
criticism of him was he was very privileged his entire
mhm.
life, and he thought the world worked that way because the world worked that way for Hilo. So
Well, and I was going to mention, I had said this in a previous episode when you had mentioned something similar, that sometimes people in places of privilege like this that we want to learn a lesson never have to.
Mhm.
They get to just sit in their little bubble and enjoy their privilege. And Hilo might be one of those people.
Yeah. So, well, you know, that oh, Hilo. And I mean, I loved Hilo. I thought he was a great character to have. I also I didn't like Barrow, but I loved that Barrow was like such an inverse of the character we usually see, which is the downtrodden man who's
Mm-hmm.
so right in so many things and so just that he's always fighting. But
Mm-hmm.
Barrow is incredibly self-serving, and he shows that like not everyone is great, not everyone who
Mm-hmm.
is beholden to like power structures like is a good person. Like some
Yeah.
people just suck. And I do think he is a sociopath, just or like a psychopath who does not care about the feelings of others. Because
Mm-hmm.
the only person he cared about in this book was one person he had a random incident with. And I do think that that's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how it works, where like if you do not have the emotional capacity to make connections with people, you just make weird connections with one
Mm-hmm.
person for no reason. Like it's very weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think Barrow is really I did not like this character, but I think there are reasons that this character is written in the way that he is. And I think it's a really good portrayal. Again, how we can see a character as bad, but also recognize that they make good points and
Mhm.
that maybe they are doing things that we should be looking at and looking into
Mhm.
because there are legitimate reasons for the way that they feel this way and that they have been really treated poorly and unjustly,
Mhm.
but at the same time they can still be a bad person
Yeah.
and do a lot of bad things even though they needed to receive more equity.
Yeah.
Like
Well, it's the old adage of like, there's something weird about people's belief systems. And I'm going to go off here on some political rant, but
mhm,
there's a weird belief system that people who are poor need to be deserving to like get
mhm,
assistance. And I do think that that is a failing where it's like, nope, poor people can suck too. Like the world is built on a plethora of people. Rich people suck a lot of the time.
mhm,
Like a lot of them suck.
mhm.
So guess what? Poor people get to too. It's like the old adage of like, well, someone wastes their money on this, and it's like, okay, other people waste money on other things all the time.
Yeah.
Like you're judging them because they have less than you, and you think they
Mhm.
should just be making themselves miserable and hoarding every single dollar
Sure.
they have. And I do think that like it is good to show Barrow as like a counter to that, where it's like this person still technically deserved some amount of dignity. I will agree that
Mhm.
Nico deserved to say like, no, fuck you, you're not part of my story.
Yeah.
But like he did deserve some dignity in the moments he was given compassion. It's like, oh, it sucks because you don't know his past. But then it's like, okay, but also maybe he did deserve compassion in that moment. Like,
Mhm.
and so we're judging based on all we know, but like, isn't it good in that moment that that person took compassion on this one person who, knowing what they know, gave him,
Mhm.
a give me. So that is nice to see. It's the same with Shay, where I was like, you know what? Shay deserves to have a guy who's kind of bland. If that's what she wants, like
Mhm.
we got to see a girl who got to make mistakes and maybe ended up with someone who we didn't want her to end up with. But like, isn't it nice that this character didn't have to end up with a bastion of amazingness and got to just
Sure.
have her milk toast man?
Mhm.
Like, I do think that that's a unique way to tell the story. And it goes back to what you were saying that there are shades of everything in this novel and
Mhm.
no one is perfect.
How did you feel about the way that Barrow's story ended?
I really liked it. I thought it was I
Yeah.
if he is the man in the cab, which I'm sure he is, I, I liked that less. I kind of
Mhm.
hoped we would end with him and Nico. Uh just because I thought that that was the perfect button of Nico being like, you're not my story. I don't blame you. I don't really think of you at all. Like I
I
just
would have
thought
liked that
that
ending there too.
yeah.
But I do
I
think it's kind of funny if you read into it, like I think that Barrow is also that man in the cab. But I think it's funny if it just continues to play out for Barrow that he's like continually trying to become relevant and
begging people to take him seriously.
No,
get out of here, Barrow. No one wants to hear from you. And it's like, I don't know. That was the one moment where I was like, this is something where I hope Fonda Lee doesn't listen to this episode, but like someone is like, Fonda, maybe you should take that part out. She was like, no, this is my part. Like it's definitely like an author moment where I feel like authors always want that like button to be like, it's like, no, just don't. We didn't need him to be there. I want him out of this series already. But
there were several moments where I was just like, can we just like get this character out of here? There were so many times where I'm like, oh, finally somebody's going to kill him. And it never happened. But I think that the way that it's written is a way that's maybe worse for Barrow, that he doesn't get the easy out of just being killed off by somebody in the clan, that he has to kind of sit with the fact that nobody really cares about him anymore, that he's become a nobody, when really throughout most of the series, he was trying so hard to be someone that was in a position of power, that was listened to, that had abilities. And he tried really hard to make some of these things happen for himself, even if it was through really unethical means. But the way that he ends up being someone that nobody takes seriously and nobody cares about is maybe a worse end for him.
And I do think that it's so fascinating to see the difference between, like, because Hilo and Barrow are kind of two people who like came into the world with brute force, and then we get to see them grow out of it. And that goes to like themes of like 1984 novels and stuff, where it's like, hey, are people inherently violent, or are they just young? Because you have like the youth who like come in and like they want to hit things now and they want to go out with bangs and stuff like that. And both Hilo and Barrow kind of had that energy at the beginning of the book, where it's like they're young bloods, they want honor and respect, and they want to get it now. And then throughout the novel, we just see two men who get old. And you see one of them who like gets put into a position of power, and he tries to use that power to benefit others, and then he gets to die a hero. And then you have men like Barrow who wanted that honor and glory and then didn't learn anything from it and faded out of existence because they couldn't continue to grow. Like Barrow could have been put into positions of leadership or done this, or, you know, helped others as they fostered along. But Barrow only ever wanted the power. He didn't want the leadership. So like anytime it didn't work, when it didn't work for him, he just stopped and faded from existence. And it's a very interesting, it's kind of like the football player who goes on to college and like builds a different life for himself. And people are like, oh, but the good old days. And I was like, the good old days are now. And then you have the one who's stuck talking about the good old day, you know? So it's very interesting to watch them both and like watch them grow or not grow.
I will say, I feel like the character arcs within this story within the whole series are just phenomenal. And I personally feel like Hilo's is the best that I've ever read of any character, but in this series, he is not alone in getting an excellent character arc, because Barrow has a great one. We see Shay make a really interesting character arc. I think that Wen and Andon, they both have really interesting stories, and some of them are really kind of behind the scenes as far as their story, but then they end in such a way that you're like, wow, we should have been paying more attention to this character, because they had a really interesting side plot that we were not paying enough attention to, like the Mike brothers. So I think that that's another thing I really appreciated about this series, was how the characters started in one place and ended in a place that was not only like shocking at times, but it felt fulfilling and like it served the characters well. How did you feel about how some of them ended up?
I just agree. I think this is such a fascinating book to look at with character arcs. Like we said, I feel like this is a book series that you can go chapter by chapter and just break down characters. I want to watch a million YouTube videos about Shay and Wen and how they expand and contract as time goes on. And I just think that this is such a unique way to tell a story that doesn't get told often, where we get to see people grow old and go into middle age and have moments happen like with Shay, where it's like she does have a child, like she's not super young when she has a child. And you get to see like her versus how Wen raises her kids, and like
Mm-hmm.
where like Wen was able to be like very involved and have like Shay's mother there, and they accepted all her help. And then like Shay, it seems like Shay and Woon like take care of their daughter together. Like they have her
Mm-hmm.
mom, but her mom's a little bit older by the time they have Tia. And so it's pretty much them. So I'm like, well, that's, you don't get to see that. Like I feel like a lot of times it
Yeah.
has to be like carbon copy pasted with family dynamics. And I do think that this book just shows really well how different people are. And like there's the old adage that no one has the same parent, even in the same
Mm-hmm.
family, because like the way my parents parented me was different how they parented my sisters. And like,
Sure.
and so I do love that you get to see all the differences in the character arcs and see how different you get to see how they were raised through the POV that you
Mm-hmm.
were talking about, where you get to see what's going on from a bunch of different character perspectives. And you
Mm-hmm.
get to see the arcs through how other people view them in any given moment. And then with a lot of them, you get to see inside their own heads and see how they've changed and shifted, but still feel like they're the same person. And I don't know. I think that that's great for character arcs. I think it has the best character arcs, the best character growth that's realistic and grounded that I've seen like ever in a fantasy novel. So
Mm-hmm.
this entire series worked for me. I'm so glad we read it.
I think another thing that really is portrayed well in this is relationships and how, like you were just saying, like you never have the same parents and how
Mhm.
your relationship can be different with your parents versus your siblings' relationship with your parents. And I think that that's portrayed really well in this book too, how the characters perceiving each other is different
Mhm.
because their relationships are so different. And
Yeah.
like the Hilo Wen Shay triangle is a really great example of this
Mhm.
because we see such a strong bond and a sense of understanding and respect between Shay and Wen,
Mhm.
but we do not see that as much with Shay and Hilo. They
Right.
definitely butt heads more. There's a lot more tension. There's a lot more past trauma and
Yeah.
a lot of uh, distrust between
Yeah.
them, especially in certain moments in this book or in the series. But I I just think it's really interesting that we get to see that
Yeah.
where a lot of books would not give us that opportunity and would just like only show us one relationship. We only get to know about Shay and Wen and how they interact together. We don't get to know about how Shay and Hilo interact. But
Right.
this series, Fonda Lee does an excellent job of showing us the different relationships between each of the members of the clan and each other. And I think because like we even get like relationship dynamics between Mike Ken and Shay, and we get them between Lot Jin and Shay, and Lot Jin and Hilo, and Lot Jin and Rue, and like all these different and Nico, and all these different characters, and how they do interact differently when they're with different people.
Yeah.
So it's a really refreshing thing to see, and it may maybe I'm projecting, but it may be fondly like seeing that there's a lack of this in other fantasy stories. So
Yeah.
wanting to incorporate it and knowing that like relationships and characters are the heart and soul of a story. So expanding upon them and giving them a little more room to grow.
I wonder because I do feel like it just feels like Fonda Lee like had great characters and knew where it's like, oh, this person's getting mentioned here and they're going to be important for these reasons. And I can't wait to ask her like, was there ever a version where like Lot and Andon ended up together? Because you and I expected that, and she
Yeah.
totally just like pulled the rug out from under us, where it's like, nope, that's not going to happen. But then with Shay and Moon, it was like, well, this was inevitable. Like, and
Yeah.
is it like youngest versus like adult people? When adult people get entrenched, like it's probably more likely things are going to happen, but the youth is going to be young. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
it's just it's very clear to me that she really understood that like characters have different experiences with each other, and you
Hmm.
get to see something new in each of them. Because like I really liked Ken when we saw him, and he was like
Hmm.
barely on the page, and then like
Hmm.
Mike Tar, by the end of it, you and I were both devastated when
I
we
was
lost
sobbing.
him. And like it's just it's such a unique view of like if we're gonna do the Fast and the Furious of it all, but like family, like
Mhm.
this is looking at a family dynamic, and like I find family dynamics fascinating. So
Mhm.
seeing how that works in like generations of families, and
It's
yeah.
also interesting too, like Fonda Lee, we have said previously, and she's told us when we talked to her before that she has a background in economics and business, but she clearly has just such a deep understanding of people and is really just like someone who studies people quite
Yeah.
well, because you cannot write a series like this and write characters in such a way that they come off this human if you don't
Right.
understand how people act towards each other or how they react to each other. So I I think that she's really a student of people for
Yeah.
sure. Another thing that I'm really impressed with that usually you and I are not paying attention to as much, but we did in this book, the action.
The action
And
is so cool.
Fonda is a martial arts champion.
Hmm.
So I don't know if she's a champion, but I know she's like a martial artist.
Yeah.
So she definitely knows a lot about different fighting techniques and dynamics. And I'm probably getting all these words wrong. People come at me and tell me the right way to say these things because I'm
Right.
clueless. But I think the fight scenes and all of the action scenes were written so well that I never checked out. I knew what was happening. I was definitely paying attention. And it
Right.
was never a situation where I'm like, let's skim over this until I can get just some more speaking. That never happened. I always was right in the midst of all the action. And that's difficult to do for a lot of authors because
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't understand like the right way to insert kicks or punches or different magic systems to make it make sense and
Hmm.
keep it interesting.
I will admit I was probably not as keyed in as you. But I also think
Okay.
that that's just like I still read the fight scenes and I still knew what was going on. And I do think that there's like a certain amount of understanding how the body moves and understanding your audience. Like I think
Hmm.
sometimes like when people write an action scene, it's like we talked to Connor Caplan about this recently, where
Hmm.
it's like he's like, I don't like to use a sword that I haven't seen myself because I don't know how
Hmm.
it moves and I don't know how it handles. I can't pretend to know, so I like to do it myself, and
Hmm.
then I know, and it's like, oh, that's fascinating,
And it
and
makes
like,
sense.
and it makes sense. And so I do think that there's a certain knowledge of like watching how something works and then understanding and then
Hmm.
being able to distill it down to your audience. Cause I feel like too many
Hmm.
people do not know how to do that. And like that's no fun.
Sure.
um, and so I do think that like Fonda Lee understands how the body moves, she understands movement, and then she's just able to distill it down and make it like good for us. And like
Hmm.
and that is what I like, that like I think that there's a way to not dumb it down is the wrong word, but like at least, understand that someone might not be interested in certain things. So making sure it works for the audience you're writing for.
I mean, I think we can, people talk about this in terms of like making science accessible to readers so that you
Hmm.
can understand what's being presented to you because a lot of people aren't just going to be able to immediately understand like scientific research documents when we read a nonfiction book that's about a specific animal or disease or whatever science topic we're talking about. A lot of times it helps that the author has written it in a way that is in more common language. So I
Hmm.
think Fonda Lee has maybe figured out how to make her writing and her action more accessible to
Yeah.
readers so that it is understood and that we aren't like, what the heck is a triple knuckle double twist fist? Like, I have no idea what that is. Like,
Right.
and no one will because that was something I made up. But
I w-
like,
oh, I went into Lotus and then I did the Crouching Tiger and then I
yeah,
did Part the Waves, and you're just like, sure you did.
like
Like,
who knows what that is?
yeah.
Okay. But the way that everything is described and plays out, I think, is done in such a way that we can understand what has happened. We can feel bad because they are hurt,
Right.
and the there's going to be consequences from some of the fighting that's occurred. But I think that she's made a lot of her action really accessible to a
Right.
variety of readers.
I agree. So
Speaking of action, so there's a lot of really like surprising things that happen throughout the series, and there's a lot of action. Were there any moments that like really surprised you or that you thought were very well done in terms of like shock factor or the action in them?
I was really shocked by all of the Aitmata and Shay fight, like the fight
Hmm.
that everyone always brought up. It was
Hmm.
just really interesting to see them because I loved that one because it was a little bit more complicated. Like Shay's POV of fight scenes was so different than Hilo's. And I feel like a lot of the times we got Hilo or Andon, and maybe this is what I liked about it was like it was such a unique one because we heard a lot about Hilo's fight where Hilo was very like, I gotta go in hot, I gotta go in now, even if I'm not the most skilled. If I can do this like heavy and hard and like get him, get him where it
Hmm.
hurts, I can walk away from this. And I might die, but I won't. And then
It's like there's
Andon,
strategy, but not a lot of thought put into it.
yeah, there's strategy, but not a lot of thought. And he's very willing to die. Like Hilo was
Hmm.
always 1,000% on board with
Hmm.
dying.
Hmm.
And then Andon,
Shay and Aimata are very much about preservation.
yes. And so Shay's walking into it like, I need to survive. I need to survive. I need to figure out the best way and the most
Hmm.
strategic way possible to really show, because I have to fight her. I can't not
Hmm.
fight her because if I don't fight her, then I'm a goner. But if I do fight her, I can't die.
Hmm.
And that's really fascinating to read someone who has self-preservation trying to fight and trying to hold their own while
Hmm.
knowing that they will likely have to concede to make sure that they stay alive.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating move. And I love seeing the intricacies of it. And I loved when Shay wondered if she could win. And then Ike being able to just come back at her. And like it was a really great choreography. And it was really great to see the movement and strategy behind it. And I really
Oh,
like being
absolutely.
able to see the work there.
I think another thing about that specific fight was
Okay.
that like it cements Shay as a legend herself. She goes up against a legendary person who is well known for their fighting abilities and their influence within the clans. And people don't think that she's going to be able to take her. And the choices that she makes and the decisions that she has to make on the like in the blink of an eye
Yeah.
end up cementing her as kind of a legendary figure going forward because people continue to talk about this fight for years and years to come. So that's a really interesting aspect of that fight in general.
Yeah. I agree. But
I
it,
think for me, two action scenes that I really appreciate. One is in the first book where Lon goes into his duel
yeah.
and is injured because that's kind of the beginning of all of this, really. We have a little buildup beforehand of some of the drama within the clan, but it's the downward spiral of Lan that
Hmm.
brings all of this to what it becomes and leads to Hilo becoming the pillar. And
Yeah.
I think that it's a really intense fight and it was something that he felt obligated to do but did not want to.
Yeah.
And Hilo was very willing to just step in and do it for him or to tell him you don't have to do this, which is unique to Hilo. But it was interesting to see Lon as someone who generally was more of a thoughtful person recognize that he needed to show his strength
Yeah.
and ended up really sacrificing a lot, including his life, because of this fight. And it really just kind of escalated the rest of the events of the series. Another moment that, like, I will think about this forever is the meeting that they had in Jade Legacy where a bomb go well
Oh,
a bomb goes off and
yeah.
Aitmata jumps out a window like seconds beforehand and there's an assassination attempt and it's just so many things happen and it's so well written and you don't know what's going to happen. Like I was speed reading through that because it was so intense to try and figure out who was going where, what was going to happen, what was happening to this character, who was missing, what clans are still put together. Is Hilo dead? Is Wound dead? Is Aitmata going to make it? So many things happened in that chapter and it was really, really intense. And I really loved that whole
Yeah.
scene.
I agree. I really loved that scene. It was so it was so good to just watch. And like, I feel like I was in the room waiting to see
Yeah.
what happened, and like watching everyone's reaction to Hilo just standing at the door and just sitting there, and everyone be like, I guess we're gonna watch this woman die. Like,
I guess he's just going to block the door. Nobody's going to
yeah.
challenge him.
Well, and it's that weird thing of like, I don't think anyone wanted to challenge him, but they wanted to, like, they're like, I guess we can just give permission. Like, we can be done with her and this could be it. And that's going to be great, you know?
It was literally a moment where, I mean, a lot of people have this if they experience any kind of like, or if they're nearby any kind of accident or anything that happens where you just like can't look away, but you can't, you're frozen, you can't move to do anything. And I think that's how a lot of the people in that situation felt, because they did not know what to do to help, if they should help, where anyone was going to go, if they were in danger, what was going to happen next. And so when Aitmata jumps out a window, it's already broken, but when she jumps down, it's astounding. And then Hilo goes after her because he's like, you are not getting away, woman. I will chase you to the ends of the earth.
And then, it all goes to shit.
Even more happens. It's just, that was really intense.
Yeah, I agree. It was a very good scene. I just can't believe how well written this is and how wonderful this is. And I don't know.
How about favorite characters? Who are you thinking?
I do think that Wen took the cake for me throughout this entire series. She was so complicated, and I just loved seeing how put together she was, but how messy she was. Like, in her own head, I feel like Wen shares a lot of qualities with me where everyone's like, oh my gosh, she like has everything put together and she's so thoughtful and she sees everything. And it's like, yeah, the inside of her head, she's like a huge bitch. Like, she's just thinking the worst thing. Like, sometimes you're just like, oh God, this person, but they're like, oh, you're so nice with dealing with people. And it's like, yeah, because everything I want to say is inside my head.
Oh,
like, not to you, but I usually tell you things, but
oh jeez.
I do love that about Wen, that like on the inside of her head, she's like, Anton, wasted talent. He should be out there doing it. But like, then he's like, I really don't know what Wen's thinking. And it's like, that's just, I think that's a fun character to play with. And like, I just think that Fonda Lee could have taken her a bunch of different ways that would have discredited her or made her like too much of one or too much of the other. But when like, she's just so human and so real.
Sure.
And like, it's like the kids saying like, oh, you know, she won't speak to Nico, and you know he really messed up because she is the one that you have to watch because everyone else,
she's the glue of the family.
Yeah. And so if she's not on board, you're in trouble, you know? So I do think that that's just, it's fascinating to see, and it's really fun. I don't know what to say, but like, I love it so much.
Yeah, I appreciate that take, that you just kind of like the way that she's portrayed, as far as like people thinking that they have an idea of what's going on, but really not knowing the whole story. And she's definitely one of those characters that we don't know the whole story, and she becomes so dynamic and involved in the clan and so important to the clan. And she really plays like a very good spy and somebody who seeks out information. So yeah, I mean, it's not just the POV that we don't always know what's going on. The other characters don't always know what's going on. It's literally all of her actions that not everybody always knows what's going on, because she's really involved and taking in a lot of things, doing the most.
And like I said, I just think it's great to have like the greenest quote unquote character be a Stone Eye. Like, just have it be like, she is the one who fundamentally shows off what it means to be a green bone, and she has no capabilities, and she's still like one of the most powerful people by the end of the novel. I find that fascinating.
I think it's a really great way to tie that in, that the person who has no use for Jade ends up being one of the most powerful people in the clan.
Who's your favorite character?
It's got to be Hilo. I mean, I can't not say it's Hilo at this point, because even though I'm annoyed by things that he's done, and I think that at times I can be like, this is a terrible person, I just so appreciate the growth that this character has, and how deeply flawed and complicated he is. but I just love his loyalty to his family and friends, his loyalty to the clan, how he's usually hardest worker in the room. You know, even if he comes off as a person with a ton of privilege, he's continually trying to do things and to amplify those around him. He's a champion for other people. And he, at the end of this, really makes so many changes for the good of the clan that I really feel like his legacy is upheld in a really great way.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that we both had different favorites.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened since like a Green Perrin discussion.
Perrin did not end up being my favorite character.
I know, I'm joking.
Let's get that out there. Perrin continues to search for Fael.
Perrin continues.
I wonder if I ever found her.
I don't know. It seems like she was lost forever to him. Well, I think
any final thoughts?
No, I think I'm kind of, I mean, we have final thoughts, but they're coming next week because we get to
save them
ask
up for
the author. So guys, make sure you're going onto our Discord. There is a season 4 Jade City by Fonda Lee chat. Please go into that and like ask questions. If you have some questions for Fonda Lee, we would love to ask them. And please just join us next week because it'll be a big episode for us. This Fonda Lee interview will be the 100th episode of our pod. That's 100th episode of the main feed. I mean, if you include all of our bonuses, who knows?
We're not
over. Counting. We're way over. But like, this is actually like the 100th main feed episode that doesn't have a bonus on the title. So that's huge for us. And I think it's the perfect 100th episode for us. Like season 4.
Bringing in our other best friend.
Bringing in our other best friend.
I will never let her say she's not best friends with us. Fonda Lee, you are our best friend.
You are our best friend. So make sure you're joining us for that. Thank you so much for joining us. We say this at the end.
Thanks for listening.
Season, but we really appreciate doing this. Like, this is some of the best time I've had in like quite a few years, and I feel so blessed to get to talk to you guys each week. And Laura, thank you for being my co-host, and you're amazing. And Laura's been doing some great work for the pod. So everyone, please, like, you know, give her a little tiny applause during the Fonda Lee interview because you've been working really hard on this podcast lately. So and for people who don't know, because I'm announcing it literally today, like I got engaged last week. So I've been very busy. So I really appreciate everything you've been doing to make sure that this podcast is going smoothly while I was doing things like planning barbecues and apparently now planning a wedding. So I appreciate you and all that you do. And I can't wait.
I'll be recording a podcast episode live from the wedding. So
that will
be fun.
Standing up there holding a microphone towards me. And
what
book are you going to say?
Bonus episode. I'm covering the prequel to the Wheel of Time at Hannah's wedding, guys.
And you know what happened in New Spring? New Spring.
What's it called? New Spring. Why was I thinking it was called Winter Spring? That would make more sense.
And my wedding will be in the fall, obviously.
And so I'll be covering Winter Spring by Robert Jordan.
Winter, spring, summer, fall.
Yes. Sometimes my brain tells me things and I'm like, where did you come up with that? Stop lying, brain.
So Laura, thank you for everything you did. She has made us a great schedule for the rest of the year. So please keep an eye out for that. We have a bonus episode covering Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin coming out after the Fonda Lee interview. And then we will be headed into Indie Mission. And so we have some other exciting things. We will be covering the next Murderbot book that will be coming out in November.
Collapse.
We have an interview with Travis Baldree coming up of Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bonedust fame. I keep saying Bookshops and Bonedust. And then we have a one-off standalone that will be announced soon. So keep an eye out for that and some amazing bonus content. So
there's a lot of fun things happening and I'm so excited. We've been able to read some great books and it seemed like a lot of reading all at one time, but we're finally kind of seeing the light at the end of the
mellowing
tunnel.
Out.
So we're kind of both in a spot where we're like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to not have to like read something and
every single day,
take copious notes on it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Except we have to do Indie Mission and another book, but we actually are Laura and I built a wonderful schedule that I keep saying like keep an eye out for, because we are announcing it slowly as the year goes on. But we will not be doing season 5 until January. So you guys know that like it is September when this is coming out, or like it's almost September. And so we have September, October, and November and December that is like bonus content or covering a lot of bonus content season.
Fun
and
stuff.
Like we're just excited to kind of lay low for a little bit, not do a full season proper, and just be able to do some highlights of other things. So make sure you're keeping an eye out. And
let's also say, like, next year, you guys hold on to your hats.
We're so excited to announce.
Hold on to your hats,
because we are not prepared. No, we are prepared. We're so prepared. We already have a schedule built out, but like
trying to get there.
We are going to be announcing big things. Big things are happening.
Yes. We'll just leave it at that. That big things are happening. Big series are happening. So hold on to your hats.
Fan favorite series are happening. So we will see what is on the horizon. I don't know if you want to cut that out if it was too big of a hint, but
I don't think it's too big of a hint. It could be referring to length, or referring to the size of individual books, or who knows? The characters, we don't know.
We don't know. How tall are they? But before we get to that, guys, make sure that you are rating, reviewing, and subscribing. You can now rate on Spotify episodes individually, and you can even comment on them.
Which is great. It's a fun thing. I really like that.
So make sure you guys are doing all of those things. Just any little bit helps get people into the fold and gets people into the conversation. We really appreciate all the time and effort you guys do listening to us. Make sure you're following us on Twitter and Instagram and BlueSky and Threads and TikTok
and Hive and all of them
at OWWR Pod. Hannah's going to start posting some videos on TikTok once I actually put makeup on, because again, I was doing lots of things this weekend, so I am exhausted and I look shambles.
She's going to be doing a lot of dancing, mostly TikTok dances. So everyone go.
You want to see a little shopping bag, banging on the windows.
I mean, you could do like adding books to the cart. I think that would be fun.
So yeah, make sure you're just following along, subscribing where you can subscribe.
We love interacting with you.
We do. And join our Discord. Join it, please. We want to hear from you guys so much.
Yeah, our Discord is a little sparse at the moment. I'd love to get some more people in the mix over there.
So head on over to our Discord, guys, because we're doing fun things. We like to chit chat with y'all. And also make sure you are joining our Patreon. We're doing a little bit of a revamp there soon, to make sure you guys can support in any way you can. But this month, our bonus episode is questions to ask your partner with Connor Caplan.
Weird questions to ask your partner. And our partner in this situation was the author CM Caplan,
who we recently had on to discuss The Fall Is All There Is. And he was so great. He sat down, he answered every question. He had 30 seconds to answer a question. We asked him some questions about their writing experience, or who their favorite person was to write, or scenes, and weird questions like, what would you do if someone asked you to watch a laptop and then someone else stole it? So like all the things.
Like, just keep in mind, if you ever have an elephant that you don't know what to do with, do not trust Connor with it.
Do not give it to Connor.
You can find out why if you listen to the episode.
So make sure you're downloading that, because that will be out by the time you listen to this. So make sure you're following along, and join us next week with Fonda Lee for our 100th episode. Woo!
Bye.
Yeah,
Friends, we're back.
Friends, we're back for an emergency after-hours session, as in we got some listener questions and we want to read them before we close out the season. So just for reference, you should always be reaching out to us on Discord, because we will answer your questions on there.
We are very responsive to messages.
We just want you guys to like us.
We're desperate for serotonin and fans.
We also just got done talking to Fonda Lee, who is like a dream of a person. So I think we're a little bit looser now. So it's the perfect time for us to answer your listener questions. So Laura, for many, Hilo is the standout character of the Green Bone Saga. How do you feel about his characterization, particularly his unique brand of emotional, hyper loyal, toxic masculinity?
Honestly, I love it.
Look, we hate to see the toxic masculinity, but we love to watch it walk.
I am a glutton for this character. Honestly, I can't get enough of Hilo and Hilo's point of view and all the things surrounding Hilo because I just find him so interesting. Even if I hate a lot of the things that he does and says and the way that he treats other characters, I just find him so deeply interesting that I just love everything about the way that he was written because he's such a human character. And I like that we have a hero, quote unquote, that is not this perfect man, that he is deeply flawed. And I really love everything about this character, toxic masculinity included, honestly, because I think it's realistic and relatable and so human.
So I think I struggled with Hilo a lot more than a lot of people do. Mostly because of his specific brand of like toxicity, which hurts me, which is like a certain amount of like person who doesn't see how privileged they are and harms other people because of it. I tend to have very specific feelings. I've talked about this a couple of times in episodes, but like certain amounts of television watching becomes unpleasant for me when someone is super harmful and they shouldn't be. One of the examples I often give is there are like episodes of Gilmore Girls where I hurt for Lorelai when she's interacting with her mom because her mom is in a position of power as the mother of a relationship. And her daughter just wants to be loved and accepted by her mother. And when Lorelai's mother can't do that, it hurts me. I was raised in a very nice household where my parents were very validating. So I think I don't have that like certain like brand of shield that other people do. But like because of that, I think sometimes Hilo hurts me because he hurts other characters. Like the way he starts using sex workers. Like I understand it's a deeply flawed person who's doing that and he's hurt, but it's one of those things where it's like your wife is in pain and your wife is fighting back from the brink of death and she just wants to be forgiven. And instead you're doing this. And there is almost a form of like, he knows she can't say anything because he hasn't forgiven her yet. And that always hurts me. But I also think that that's a very powerful character. That a character can do that. I think it speaks well of the writer and it speaks well of the character building that a character can have that type of an effect on me where I don't particularly like them in certain moments. And I will say that I also think like Fonda Lee does a very effective job of showing that character and the growth, because I will say one thing about our society right now with how permanent online things are, we forget that people do grow sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's good to see a character do those things where his younger self hurt people, but his older self learned from it in some type of way and still made mistakes, but was able to move past some of the harm he did with the other person. So like, I think he and Wen became stronger. There is another world where they didn't become stronger, where she left him and she had every right to leave him. But in this case, they moved past it and they grew stronger. And I think it would be, you know, it's a different storytelling motive to say like, well, she just walked away from him and never looked back, which is like the Godfather version of things sometimes. But there is like that what happens afterwards and how do things happen after you put them back together again and they're not perfect and you both see each other's flaws, but you accept them. And that's also like a very stunning thing to read about because like I say all these things about Hilo, but as someone who has a drinking problem, I too had to move past some of the harm I caused people. And I think that like it's just a very human thing to see that someone can cause harm, but someone can heal afterwards and try to be a better person for it. So I do think that that's good to see in Hilo.
I think kind of building off one of the things you said too, though, Hilo does change as a person, and I also appreciate that he doesn't necessarily make amends for everything, but he progresses to a point where he tries to do better things to help people that he's wronged. And this would be like his son Rue being an example of that, how he starts to donate to charities and things that help Stone Eyes. So I think that is maybe something that is more of a glimmer of hope for Hilo and his characters, that he's not necessarily making amends, but he is growing and trying to do better in a small way.
Also, something I do not always agree with is making amends, because I think sometimes when you're trying to make amends, you're trying to make it about yourself and like, I caused harm. Do you forgive me? And it's like, sometimes you can just admit like harm was caused. There is a mess and we can move past it. Or you could like, that's something I've learned where it's like, I've hurt people who decided not to have a relationship with me anymore. And it's like, they have every right to do that. And all I can do is move away from it. I can't go back and try to make amends with that person. I can only try to make myself better and use it as a way to like launch a better self. And I do think that Hilo does that. And it is a very unique perspective and not one that we see often in writing. And that's why like, I have a lot of struggles with Hilo, but I really appreciate him as a character. So
yeah.
And then this is a question that we did as a small like preview to next week, did ask Fonda Lee. But looking back now from the end of Jade Legacy, how do you think Lon would have handled the events of the trilogy had he not passed away?
So it's hard for me to answer this question because we just did an interview with Fonda Lee and
where she answered it.
We kind of got the answer to this question. So I feel like I'm not in a place where I can say
that's fair.
this.
I will say that I think Lon was someone who scrambled a lot. Like I think they kept calling him a peacetime pillar. And I do think he would have made a lot more mistakes because he couldn't get out of that headspace of being a peacetime pillar. And I also think like Lon is a very effective character because he's like what Woon and Shay think they are. Like Woon and Shay are like, we're
the bastions of goodness.
We're the bastions of awesomeness and bastions and like paragrams of like just being great and upholding morals. Yeah, the most morals. Like we just care so much about others. But like that actually was Lon. And like being that person is kind of a big bummer. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes because the rest of the world isn't the way you are. And you usually hold the rest of the world to your standards when that is not going to be effective for you.
Yeah.
And so I do think Lon would continue to make those mistakes. I would have hoped that but then you also have those moments where it's like, well, would Lon have ever reached out to Ani and like gotten to know Nico? Because I feel like part of him would have been like, she's better off without me. And then like, yes, Nico would have had a mother, but like it just, a lot of things would have changed because I think Lon was a little bit of someone who didn't like messes because he was trying to be the like moral superior person in the room at all times. So, the core POV characters all come from a very privileged perspective of the Call family, the only exception being the shithead Barrow. Is there any aspect of the world that you feel is ripe for exploration that falls outside of what we saw in the books?
Honestly, I would like to get a little more of the Abukai perspective.
Oh my gosh,
because I think that would be fascinating. I am honestly a little less interested in getting more of the Aspanians.
I was actually going to say I was really interested in the Ugatanians, like the Ugatanians in the mountain and their relationship, because like we see so much of Aspania. I do not care about Aspania anymore, but like I do think that like the mountain perspective and the Ugatanians would have been very fascinating because it's a different political and foreign dynamic, and like a little bit. Yeah, I think that would have been fascinating, and I also just think like any person Fonda Lee wants to give me, I'm going to read about them. Like,
I suppose if she wrote a story about Aspania, I'm not going to be like, no, never reading this.
But it's more like, hey, I want to know about the guy who collects garbage from all of these people and like sees their trash and like hates them and has a right to. Because like Barrow is such a shithead that you're just like, yeah, he makes a point, but also he's the worst. So what are you gonna do? And so I think like seeing people who actually have their heart and mind in the right place would be fascinating. And like seeing like some of the people in power of the green bones who like, because you and I talked about like these green bones have to be like shit talking the mics all the time. Like they have to be like, oh God, he put another one in power, you know? So I do think it'll be interesting to see how people who are under the No Peak clan but like still in power would have also been fascinating. Just seeing like more perspectives like through the lens of like what do these people think of the Call family, because it's going to be messier and it's going to be different, you know.
And it would also be interesting too to get some of the perspectives of like the Lantern Men and how they have to deal with running a business when they're dealing with this clan that's just like, okay, we're coming in really quick because we have to have a meeting.
Right.
And, sorry, your place got shot up.
Or like people in like areas outside of like Janloon that like are still in KCON, but like, oh my gosh, Janloon, like I hate that city.
Yeah, people that like, aren't Jade users, like how do they respond to all of the violence and things that are happening? Because we know that obviously like there's public schools that exist, like Rue went to one. So like these people that are kind of like in Rue's life, maybe that were like, oh, well, he went to school with this person and their family does this or that in KCON. And it's like, wait a minute. There's life outside of Jade and the No Peak clan.
Well, literally, like when at the beginning was like, yeah, I worked for an art gallery, and it's like, yeah, let's see what's happening in the art gallery. Like, tell us more.
Tell me more.
Do you plan to read the other Greenbone entries, the Jade Setter of Janloon or Jade Charts, on or off the pod? I would be willing to do a Patreon episode with these, honestly. I'd be willing to do bonus episodes with these. I will probably read these via audio because sometimes that's just easier for me for shorter stories that are like offshoots like this, but not because I think that they are any lesser than I'm going to read them. It's just I actually know that I believe the Jade Setter of Janloon is on an audiobook on one of my library apps, so I can get it really quickly. And so I'm probably going to do that.
I actually have both of them via audio on Scribd.
Oh,
so I was planning on reading them, whether or not we do it on the podcast or not. So, yeah.
It's a good idea.
I also have Fonda Lee's other series, EXO
Same.
Crossfire, that I'll be reading at some point. But I'm definitely a mood reader. So it's one of those things where like I always have the best intentions when I acquire more books. But then I have to read books for the podcast. And then you just get into a phase where you're just like, oh, I want to read this. And no, this one's hitting me now. And oh, I just got this one.
I also feel like if I read any of her other series, I would just be comparing them to Jade City. And like Fonda Lee literally has said, like, this is a very like specific book that she read at a very specific time. That was just the right moment, right time for this book. And so I don't want to compare and contrast other works and be like, is this as perfect as I think Green Bone Saga is? Because the answer is probably no, because authors are complex people who write different stories.
Well, it's also a YA series.
Yeah. So like
there's going to be a different feel to it. So it's not, in my mind, it's not fair to compare different types of series to one another.
Right. For many, the idea of a fully fledged HBO adaptation is the dream. Off the top of your head, are there any actors you'd cast in a perfect world?
So I said this to Fonda Lee, but I'll say it now. I pictured Ming-Na Wen from, of my knowledge, like Mulan and the Book of Boba Fett. She plays Fennec Shand in the Book of Boba Fett, as I pictured her as Aitmata. And I could not get rid of that image in my mind.
I also told Fonda Lee this because I said something I appreciate in these novels is the fact that like she takes characters that you think are going to be a monolith and she makes them so complex and so like inverted from what you expect that I want Jackie Chan to play the Torch of KCON.
So something funny. Continue, Hannah, and then I'll
talk. But just like I just find it fascinating to give Jackie Chan a role that is not lovable and like so complex where it's like everyone is like, yes, he's this bastion of like everything we love. And then you meet him and he's like, oh, I'm the worst human being you've ever met. Thank you very much. And I do think that would be very effective, especially for like an HBO dark Green Bone Saga. I just want Jackie Chan to do that.
So something funny about Jackie Chan was apparently when they were doing the reboot, The Karate Kid, they asked him if he was interested in a role, and he was like, "Yeah, but who were you gonna get to play the teacher?" And he was like, and they were like, you,
You.
you're not young enough to play the Karate Kid." And I think that's just so wholesome that
Yeah. He's just like, oh,
he
of
thought that,
course.
like,
What do you think? Um, and then I just think like playing with those types of different characters,
mhm.
like I think you could have some very interesting um people.
There's
I've been
tons of really talented actors that we could place in here. And honestly, I think that I'm tempted to not go for some of the really popular actors all the time.
Mhm.
Like I said, Ming-Na Wen, she's very popular, but I'm tempted to want to find some actors that maybe have like a grittier look to them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where it's like, yeah, I could, they're not like the most beautiful person in the world. I'm not like drooling, wanting to see their abs. And maybe like somebody that isn't classically beautiful in one of these
Hmm.
roles, because these are such complicated stories that I feel like it would make me feel more connected to it if the people looked more realistic and human to what they might look like in real life.
What you're saying is you don't want Darren Barnett from Never Have I Ever to play Andon.
Correct. He'd probably play like Rue or Nico. They'd be like, "Oh, we'll give him a
He's
13-year-old."
yeah, he can play 13. It's fine. He's hot.
Yeah.
He is 29. Or no, he's 32.
Yeah, he's older than me.
But I also think like I just think you could play. I don't want like I also don't want like shiny happy stars. I've been
Mhm.
listening a lot to uh Blank Check with Griffin and David about Park Chan-wook's series. Like he's a South Korean film director and screenwriter and producer. And I think if you like look into his like different actors and actresses that he's used for more like horror thriller genre, I
Mhm.
think if you're gonna do an HBO adaptation, don't get shiny happy people, get dark
Yeah.
grim people. Um,
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of people online that are fan casting and they're like, Simu Liu, he would be
you know,
great. And I'm like, honestly, he's too pretty. Like he's
too
too pretty for
pretty.
me.
Yeah, so I kind of want like darker, grittier people. That's my hope. And like I am not effective enough at knowing indie films or dark, gritty people.
Hmm.
I only know like very shiny, happy people,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So, but yeah, I think that there is like, I also don't want, like, I don't know, part of me doesn't want this to be like, I understand it has to be because, like, obviously, Fonda Lee, uh, is like primarily like American. Um, but I would totally wish that this TV series was all dubbed and not like
Yeah.
English. And so I would want foreign actors in these roles if this were a perfect world.
That would be
And
really
I
cool.
yeah, and I don't know enough foreign actors and actresses, but I that would be perfect world. Everyone's gonna watch it because they love the series so much. I don't want it in English. That's my weird hill to die on, but
I dig
yeah.
that take.
Yeah, so it said it was a perfect world, so I get what I want. And
You
then
make the rules.
the last question for us is very expansive with our podcast because it says, like the Wheel of Time, the scope of the story greatly expands from first book to last. Do you feel the transition was handled better or worse than Wheel of Time? Why?
You know, you answer first.
I mean, it was handled better because, again, I think a huge thing with Wheel of Time is like, yes, Wheel of Time takes place over many years, but the characters have very little growth. I feel like that they're kind of held in their own like Peter Pan syndromes where they're thrown into a very specific situation very quickly and then they stop growing afterwards. Like they are still fundamentally the same person, but they still do the same actions. They still have the same reactions. Um, and it never feels quite earned. Like it feels very weird
Hmm.
to have Perrin have the same outburst after he loses his entire family that he does before he lost his family. It's very weird to have like moments that feel earned where Rand does seem to be like going into the mass of like, I am going crazy. Sorry for the term, but like, and then all of a sudden he just heals himself and he's the
Hmm.
exact same person as before. Those things just never felt earned to me. And then we also have like the poor Matt complex of like Brandon Sanderson has admitted that he did not understand Matt. And so Matt just falls back. And then Nynaeve, who is one of the most dynamic characters and one of the most infuriating characters for me, still doesn't get a proper payoff because Brandon Sanderson also didn't know what to do with her. So she became wife. And so I just think that like those were a lot of frustrations you and I had throughout those novels. A queen gets into power because they hand it to her. Like all of the earned potential in the first couple books just gets like passed over for a quick story plot. And then she's just good at her job without learning anything. Like it just none of it felt earned ever. Where in this book, again we've talked about this like over the last couple, like over this episode in particular. This is giving you a snapshot of a moment in time where you understand what happened in the interim. Where the other books kind of like walked you through every single step and never changed. This was like a lot has changed. Here's why. And you felt the changes of the characters as we went along without changing them so fundamentally. So I think that this was a much more, it's a much better job. So Laura, what's your answer?
So I for me, we're really kind of comparing apples and oranges here because the Wheel of Time series is what I would classify as like a classical high fantasy. And the Green Bone Saga is an atypical urban fantasy in my mind. And in classical fantasy stories, we generally don't have as much depth given to the characters. And we're not seeing their motivations and struggles as much as we are in the Green Bone Saga. And I think that characterization that we get helps move the story along. And also the way that Fonda Lee has handled the time jumps, we understand character motivations better. We can kind of follow along with the story more. And I know when we were reading and covering the Wheel of Time, you had said to me I was complaining about some of the characters being annoying, and you had said to me at one point something like, well, they're only this old. And I was shocked because it felt like we had been with them for years, and I could not understand why they still acted this way. But the story in Wheel of Time, it became so like overly complicated that I think even Robert Jordan didn't know how to take certain storylines, and it kind of created its own problems where the Green Bone Saga seems like it was expertly plotted out and comes to a much more satisfying conclusion because one, it's shorter and it does still have a lot going on, but it seems like there was so much more thought put into the direction that each of these characters was going to go, and Fonda stuck with it versus continually adding in more and more and more and more and more characters. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Robert Jordan adding in more characters, but I feel like the farther he got along, it seemed like he started to lose a little steam with some of the storylines, specifically like Perrin's, like with his whole like I can't even remember now what
wolf
it is.
walker. I forget. Like he's a wolf walker.
He can speak to wolves. He has yellow eyes. But with that whole storyline that could have been so interesting, that kind of just fell by the wayside. And I think it just became a little overly complicated for him as an author. And then it again suffered from the standpoint of bringing in another author to finish the story who, like you said, Hannah, did not really know what to do with some of the characters. So then we kind of were left with like a bad taste in our mouth when it came to some of their endings. Some of them we thought the Sanderson did really well, and we really liked Sanderson's books, honestly, but it was difficult to see how some of them came to their conclusion.
I feel so mad at you because you bait and switch me so hard in that question.
I mean,
you did what I do to people where people are like, do you think a sandwich is a hot dog? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? And then they say it. And then I'm like, well, here's the thing. I don't actually care. So you asked me what I thought. Then you were like, here's the thing. It's apples and oranges. They're not comparable. And I was like, well, that was on me then.
Well, it's something I've noticed that we've been doing. And I'll just address it in this episode. we constantly, as we go along, it's, I think, only natural for us as we are talking about these series to compare to previous series that we've done. But the thing is, each series that we've covered is so different that it's really, it's not quite even in the same playing field to compare any of these series to one another. I mean, obviously, we've covered 3 fantasies and a science fiction, so we tend to less mention Murderbot Diaries in comparison to other books.
Right,
but
yeah.
when we were covering the Poppy War, we often compared it to the Wheel of Time. That might just have been because of the proximity and recording and reading those books. But I just feel like there's such different stories that you can talk about things with them, but you can't really make like super close comparisons because they're such different stories.
Fair enough. Well, that brings us to the end of our question. But thank you guys so much. Like, thank you to the listener who sent us these questions. This was a ton of fun, and it was a great way to end this. So we'll back to our regularly scheduled programming.
And tune in next week for our interview with Fonda Lee.
Episode 100. Bow, bow, bow. Bye, everyone.
Bye.